I think this is a really interesting panel. How can we elevate our work, our campaigns on that use data and on commerce or direct marketing and CRM?
I think we have a long way to go. It was very, how do you say this in English? Very manipis, right, for now. And if you are aware of what other markets are doing, let's say with data, CRM, all of that, ang layo pa natin.
I would say that we are at a place where we can create really good creative work out of insights that come from listening. But the other ways that data can actually deliver better value in marketing are not quite there yet. So I do agree with you on that point. For instance, I don't think that we're quite there yet in terms of measurement, for instance, and looking at the way that our work, our campaigns impact, let's say, brand health, or even measure the ways that it impacts a brand's reputation, and so forth.
I'll take the nicer route. So I didn't actually, when I was looking at the entries, I didn't really have as much expectations, but I think I was more pleasantly surprised at where the floor is, at least. So I think maybe I'm just comparing it to sort of a few years back when looking at the same type of entries. The types of submissions before was like very singular, but now you find it's very common in terms of how they using data and personalization, those type of things across the entries. So it's nice that that's the floor. Now, having said that, I agree with both of you guys saying that there's still ways to go in terms of how do you actually use data. Also super agreeing with you in terms of that measurement aspect that is still missing in terms of how we as a total industry look at how we look at our performance campaigns, all those type of things, and would love to go deeper on that later on. But so I think in terms of the floor, I think has risen. That's great, but I think in terms of the ceiling, there's definitely much more to go.
From your point of view, what you think of your own work, even though I think did well in the Boomerang?
I think what it did right is, I guess what I want to highlight in that it took data and it turned it into something delightful that our consumers wanted to engage with. And so, honestly, the brief of the client is always, let's do something data inspired or our year ender, because, a lot of the brands are doing that, right? The Spotifys of the world. But we always like to look at it as a consumer experience idea inspired by data, right? And so I always tell my team when they give me their ideas, it's like, okay, you're telling me this data, my data, and so, right? So how am I supposed to react to it? How am I supposed to feel about it? So that's one. The second is super basics of creativity and taking care of a brand is, what is the purpose of the brand, right? So for Cebu Pacific, it is a travel enabler. So even as we are playing with data, how does it then inspire people for their next travels? So that would be the next thing we would ask ourselves, right? So the Tara cards, it not only showed you beautifully where you went, it will inspire you in a very Filipino way of, like a deck of cards where you might want to travel next.
How was personal or first-party data used to inspire the work?
Well, Cebu Pacific I was just telling you, likes to think of itself as a digital or e-com company that happens to sell airline tickets. And so most of our transactions are already through our website and our app. And so we have so much data actually that comes from people's booking information. And so that's basically what we play with our year enders. The Tara cards is actually maybe the 4th or 5th year that we've done something like this. So part of its challenge was, we are doing this every year with our loyal flyers. How do we make it different every year? Because it's basically the same information, like where you flew, how many kilometers did you travel and all. So it's just about delivering always fresh and delightful experiences for them. But it's also, I must highlight how the clients are a big part of this. Like Cebu Pacific is a very digital savvy, forward, future looking client. I mean, and we're grateful that we have a client that pushes us, therefore, to be the same, you know?
Why do you think people are not using the data the way they should? What do you think is wrong? Or what do you think can be improved?
I think for me, it goes down to a battle between short term and long term, right? The act of let's go to the very beginning, right? When you start that process of collecting data, when you start collecting data, you can't use it for anything. There's nothing. See, when you collect data, okay, I have like 100 emails, I have 1,500 emails. There's almost nothing you can do in that sense from that lens. There's nothing short term to be gained. There's no exciting campaign you can run in that point. So it doesn't pop up very high in your list, right? But when I say short term, long term is the advertisers who really made a point to collect data and really have that process, internal processes to do that, they get rewarded in the long term. Because in the long term, like that Cebu Pacific example, if they did not have a robust data collection system process that's there, if they did not have historical data that they could pull from, even if you guys came up with that amazing idea, you couldn't execute it, right? So it's that base that's there that enables all these amazing campaigns to happen. So that part where you do that, that's the least sexy part of the whole thing, but that enables everything to happen. And I think that's the biggest problem, right? I think sometimes we get advertisers that can get really short-sighted, right? That, okay, we can do that next time. Oh, that's not going to move anything for us. But you can't get to 1 million collected data overnight. You have to start that process. You have to figure out how your offline and internal processes work with your digital. You have to figure out how your CRM comes into place, how you link it with your media platforms, how you get your analytics off the ground, how you connect it to your media platforms. Those are super unsexy things. But when you put it together, suddenly you have that foundation where anything creative you want to do that can be so amazing, you have now the capability of doing.
So just jumping off of that, I would say that the problem is largely one of culture and mindset. So of course, the tech, which will be supported by all of the IT people and the data scientists, that's one end of it. But that really won't go anywhere unless people that they are working with not only are willing to share. So thank you to that Cebu Pacific was open and up on their end, but also having that big picture mindset of being able to translate something that's typically used in a very tactical, sort of shorter, very campaign-centric manner into something where now we can take it in different directions. Now it's something that's actually part of our marketing strategy, our overarching strategy. And that will enable you then to figure out, these are probably the best uses for the data that we are able to gather now. And these are the ways that we can impact the business most. I don't think those opportunities really open up unless you have that mindset of treating data as a strategic asset rather than, something interesting that will inform a KV, or whatever emails we're putting out. Of course, that's great, but it has to be treated as a more long-term thing. So,
Who decides what can be inspiring and what is not? Is the problem because the people who handle the data don't know what sexy or unsexy is?
I would think that's not their job. I would really think, and you guys can argue, I would think it's our job to think of the what ifs. Diba? That's really the creative process. The what ifs that would be answered by the guys who would know the data. Like, what if we do something around people who only book aisle seats? Right? Do you guys have the data on the aisle seat lovers? And when we'll do a whole campaign on just aisle seat lovers.
I would say it's both, actually. Because the way I see it is that I think data is something that is, for me, that's why I really like that campaign, because it's something, it's not, from my world where it's very just performance driven, it's not always where you see data being used in such a creative way. So that's why I really liked it. But I think it has to be both, where you have to be using the data regularly in your always on regular way, right? So that made that Cebu Pacific probably more palatable to run such a live campaign, is that these are data they've already been using, right? They run year round. when you run your when you book, you're part of a list that they will retarget and talk to you again, all those type of things, because they're comfortable using the data. They know the ROI they get from talking to that person over again. Then they say, okay, why don't we find a creative way of having that message for the season?
That's
Right? So I think having that both, because parang if you're just relying on data to be just there regularly and you don't do anything interesting with it, then it's a waste. But at the same time, if you're just waiting for once a year to use that data, it's also a waste,
Yeah,
right? So I think it's a little bit of both.
Of the other brands that are in the CRM data space, who do you think might also have the potential to be like some percentage?
Well, one of the things that I found as far as being able to apply data in a meaningful, strategic way that also enables continuous learning would be I believe it was a Philippine Airlines case study. So competition,
Another airline, yeah.
doing some pretty good stuff. So the case was about they set up a way where the bids would have some kind of threshold, and if certain criteria were not fulfilled. So I feel that even if that would be sort of in the realm of unsexy data, because they're really looking at very performance numbers and all of that, not much creative as well, it actually did support a longer term strategy.
Agency's job or the creative's job to ask the what if questions, and then for the tech or data people to grow. Yes, we have that information. No, we don't have that information. It just seems to be. I feel there's a gap here that can be. I mean, because you're basically asking the questions.
That's one, right? We creatives need to ask more of the what ifs to the data guys. But I think there also has to be regularity in our exposure to the data, right? So, for example, part of what we do in Publicis Group is we have something called Trend Scout. I mean, that's not really super deep data, but at least it's just like the basics of what's happening on the internet, let's say, and the platform, which maybe is some kind of new data, which would help inform us of what's out there and what we could ask more questions of. That's one practice, right? But I imagine it would be very helpful to have practices like that with more like specific brands.
I think it's an organizational challenge as well, or a journey for the organization. Again, if you go back before, and maybe there's still companies that are like this now, but a big, when we were trying to educate the industry over the years in terms of, our Google solutions, all those type of things. I found personally one of the things that was really challenging was those who were looking at or in charge of the analytics data are folks that did not know how to interpret it, right? So for a long time, and maybe there's still companies that are like this, right? The people who are managing the analytics data, whether it's Google, whether it's Adobe, whether any analytics platform, they tend to be website developers, all those type of things, right? But they did not know, they just know how to maintain it, make sure it's working, but they were getting a gold mine of information and did not know how to interpret it.
It's almost like, once upon a time, we had creative planners who had to be anthropologists, right?
Right.
They had to have an anthropology background.
Yeah.
It's like there should be a new generation of creative planners or strategic planners who are also, who instead of being anthropological majors, they're actually data science majors.
Right.
And the reverse. Those who are coming from a data background with marketing background to be able to interpret the data. So at both sides. One thing that I think AI is really going to be even more prominent is when now it starts to be more linked. And I should go back also in terms of how we can be better with data. Is how now is when it starts to be linked now with business objectives. So what do I mean with that? I think right now how we tend to use data tends to be still very campaign specific, right? Meaning, I'm running this Christmas campaign and I'm gonna use data. Then it's gonna really be dynamic. It's gonna bid higher for the segments that's gonna do well for me, bid lower the segments for me. I think that's well and fine. It's a really good use of data, but it tends to be very siloed in the media part, right? But when you look at, for example, let's look at like a bank, for example, right? when they are deciding in terms of how much loan should I give for this particular segment, or when they're deciding in terms of like what is that this customer segment going value to me over 10 years, because when you bank, you don't just bank for the next 6 months, you'll be your customer for the next 20 years, ganyan. So before, when you look at date, before you had to manually figure that out, right, in terms of your internal processes. So this is starting to get nerdy here. But I think where AI now starts to get much better is when you now use that in that lens where it's not just a media input, but an input in terms of your business processes. I think for me is one of the things where we will see more and more from these types of advertisers, and not just finance, but travel. I think is going to be another segment where they could also, for example, how can AI help with loyalty programs, with your Mabuhay Miles, for example? How can do this? So obviously, I don't know if their efforts now, but I think that's, for me, is a really interesting example of how AI will eventually influence these certain segments that's not particularly media.
12 months from now, and we're here again, looking at entries on data and commerce and CRM. What do you think we'd be looking at?
Is it what we're expecting or what we're hoping?
Well, expecting. Where are areas, for example, where are areas that where are opportunities that marketers can look to do better work in this area?
Most of this talk has been about data, but where I think actually, like me, and you guys I want to hear what you guys think. I actually think the lower hanging fruit in terms of where we'll see more creative ideas, I think it will be in e-com. I think it'll be in commerce, simply because it is part of our worlds. I mean, everybody's shopping online, and so are their children. And so we're seeing more and more interesting ideas in that field. And I think people want to see it also in their own e-com experiences. I think that's more of an automatic well that people will try to think, let's do something fun there. But I hope data too. But let's see.
I think that we will be seeing more works that actually show how data and all of the manifestations that it can take, whether that's AI, machine learning, and so on, how it actually will be treated as something that contributes continuous learning in an organization. I think that's very important. It's probably something that's related to what you were talking about also earlier, about how right now a lot of it feels very campaign specific. So they see something interesting, they use it to inform some kind of visual content, and it stops there. So I'm really hoping that, now that I'm also seeing a lot more clients are actually thinking about things that say like brand health and how our work impacts brand health as manifested in social. These are the kinds of, that's a kind of understanding that the technology is able to provide, and expect more of the entries next year to probably talk more about that. Of course, it'll be tough because it's a lot of change management that we'll have to go through to make that happen. But that's where the potential lies, I feel, and hopefully there's more of that next year.
That was actually my hoping answer, but I'll give a different expecting answer. It's such it's a big hope, and I hope that next year we're here and that's what happens. But expecting, I'll go with low hanging fruits. I think we will see a lot more better use of AI, I think, next year in terms of the entries. I think that's a no. AI also in terms of how it transitions AI and use of data in terms of how it transitions full funnel, I think will be an interesting use case that we will see, because I think now mostly we see a lot of use cases from a media lens. We see a lot of use cases of data of AI and data for very siloed in a particular part of the funnel, right? In terms of a lower funnel campaign, an upper funnel campaign, again, but a full funnel using with data going from top to bottom and use of AI, I think will be a one. Hoping was an organizational change that happens across the industry. That would be really great. But I think also maybe hoping, expecting, I think also is that we will get a little bit more diversity in the verticals that will adopt. Usually when it comes to use, from my experience, the use case of these like data CRM initiatives, you have your travel, which is always in the forefront of stuff like this. but then you will have now these other industries that are learning from it, adjacent industries, or even also, but still also performance inclined verticals that may now also now take some learnings and apply it. So we may have some better diversity of entries next year. So that's what I'm hoping and expecting.
So, like I said earlier, this is what we were saying now, next, and new. And who knows, maybe all it takes is maybe just one pivotal brand, one pivotal client that just, just releases a torrent of really good ideas for next year. But thank you for all your perspectives, your feelings, and your recommendations for next year. And then here's hoping.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's hoping.
Here's hoping.